Welcome to our 180th edition, Europe Calling. My name is Maximilian Fries. I am the Managing Director, and I would like to welcome our four guests, panel guests. You can see them here, but I will present them later. But before we start, just a few housekeeping remarks. You may know them already. I'm just looking for my PowerPoint to show you. So we're going to start with four input talks, 10 minutes. We have four guests, Tata Marharian, Tadeusz Iwański, Sabine Fischer, and Robin Wagener. I'll introduce them in a minute. And then we're going to have a lot of time to discuss things with you. And I'd like to thank our guests because they have a lot of other tasks, and it's really important for us to have some time to discuss the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and it's important to take that time. So, as always, you can ask questions and also answer other people's questions. And not just you can vote on other people's questions up, and that will help us select the questions that everybody is interested in the most. I'll post the link for that in the chat, and you can see the QR code on this slide as well. Okay.
And I'm just repeating this in English. Welcome to this 180th webinar of Europe Calling. So we are speaking German and English today. If you want to listen to the English or German interpretation, then you can choose this under the little globe in the control panel and to choose your language. Same goes for dasselbe gilt für die Deutschen. Bitte eure Sprache im Control Panel.
So please select your language in the control panel where you see the little globe. So Europe Calling will be recorded as always, and it will be posted online on YouTube and as a podcast. So bear that in mind. If you don't want to see your name in such recordings, then use a different name. But please do use some name, otherwise I have to come up with my own name. I'm not creative enough to do that, and I don't want to call you anonymous user. Thank you. Okay, we are going to start with Tata Marharian, a battle battalion from the Donetsk region, and she's an advocacy officer at the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. And before the war, she was doing something else, as many other people. So she was a lawyer for international law. And Tata, we're really happy to see you tonight, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I do understand German, but I'm very bad at speaking, so forgive me my knowledge. I'll continue in English. First off, thank you so much for tuning in and for inviting me here. It's a great honor to be able to speak here today. As you correctly said, I currently am a combat medic at the battlefield. I have a job of managing medical evacuation crew, but this wasn't my identity before my service. Actually, I was indeed an international lawyer, and I kind of had this firm belief of that in that the international norms and principles actually value something, and they, are here to protect and to ensure peace and stability in the world, something that we all desired after the Second World War. Like, we've seen what crimes against humanity and war crimes do to the very core of human nation, and we all agreed that this is not acceptable. Let's not let this happen in the future. But today, Russia tries to change the status quo and to show that really international law is the law of the strong ones, and they can do whatever, and their behavior will be legitimized. And this is something that brings great existential crisis to me as a Ukrainian and as an international lawyer. I have to warn you, I have to leave a little bit earlier today because I'm going to commemoration ceremony of fallen soldier in Ukraine who used to be a poet. Great talented soul. His call sign was Dali because he had a very nice Dali-like mustache. He dedicated his life to poetry, and then he was obviously forced to go to the front line, and after long service, he got heavily injured and died, unfortunately. So I'm going to commemoration ceremony to basically pay respects for his heroic deed. And when I think about what is going on in Ukraine today, obviously it's been almost 2 years since the full-scale invasion, since the big war, and I've been at the front line before the full-scale invasion, and I can tell you for sure that the situation is dramatically different than even in the beginning of full-scale invasion. Nowadays, what we see. In the beginning of full-scale invasion, my personal understanding was that at least the world understands and feels what is right and what is wrong, and who is the criminal and who's the victim in this situation, and who should be supported. But nowadays, I feel more frustration towards actually convincing the world that Ukraine must be supported, not as long as it takes, but with all the means necessary to support Ukraine. This is obviously evident from the fact that our foreign partners are more hesitant to provide weapons to Ukraine, are afraid of escalation, etc. And while these talks are going on, it costs lives of our people. Today, Maxim Krivtsov is being remembered, but how many more children, and comrades of mine and my family members and family members of other Ukrainians have to die for the world to, open their eyes once again, as they did back in 2022, to realize that the threat is still here, and that Russians are hoping that we get tired, we get frustrated, and we start negotiating with a tiger who has our arm in his mouth. So one thing that I would like to convey 100% is that, Ukrainians have no other choice but to continue fighting. And this is actually a great honor for us to be able to protect the rest of the world from this horrible plague that Russians have started, the imperialistic desires that they have and ambitions that they have to spread all over the world. Obviously, Russia is not going to stop on Ukraine. We've seen this from the behavior with Georgia, with Ichkeria, and other states and nations that suffered from Russian imperialism. And Ukraine nowadays is indeed the shield of Europe. Once again, Russia does not target solely Ukraine. Russia targets the democratic discourse of nowadays. And this is exactly where we have to be united and strike back. There's a reason why authoritarian regimes go into war with democracies, because democracies are more likely to, think about negotiations like we did with Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Minsk 468. It doesn't work. We have to be very mindful of the fact that we're fighting against a very strong enemy, and very strong commensurate measures have to be taken to stop this aggression. So there are pillars to Ukrainian victory, and for us, victory has two dimensions. The first one, obviously, is the restoration of respect towards the rules of international law, particularly the prohibition of use of force or threat of use of force, the seizure of nuclear terrorism, the restoration of borders of Ukraine of 1991. This includes Crimea. This is not just a very silly desire that Ukrainians have. No, this is about respect towards international law. We were a sovereign country with defined borders, and at some point, Russia just annexed illegally part of Ukrainian territory, which has to be restored. Then the second pillar is securing democracy, securing the principles that we have for the upcoming generations. Authoritarian regimes, we see what they do. This is not the answer. And for this victory to be a reality for us to stop dying, basically, we have to go all in with the military support. Ukraine needs weapons. Ukraine needs mid-long range missiles, drones, technologies mainly. Why technologies? Because 21st century warfare is not about manpower against manpower. And if you take a look at Russia and its mobilization potential and etc., we can't compete. Russians do not value Russian lives. They just, create this shield from meat of Russian soldiers, and they just bury our land in their corpse. But we first do not want to do that. And second, even if we hypothetically want it, we don't have even the possibility to do that. So we have to have technological superiority. We have to have technological superiority in every single possible way. And we also have to cut off Russia of the ability to have this technological superiority. Despite the sanctions, despite all the measures that we've adopted since the full-scale invasion, Russia still managed to actually increase its military potential, its military budget, and the ability to produce weapons. Like, how can we speak about efficiency of sanctions when, the aggressor state actually managed to rise from the level that it was before the sanctions were imposed? And in here, I want to thank the German government and German people for, first of all, a very clear position that Ukraine must be supported. Second of all, for the call of Chancellor Scholz and overall Germany to other European Union countries to increase their support for Ukraine. This is very important. But we also have to understand that, North Korea alone supplied Russia with more than the entire civilized world supplied Ukraine. So we have to increase our help and whatever we can mobilize. I understand this is frustrating. I understand this is tiring, but I also don't want to die. I know that today, I'm going to commemoration ceremony of people that I serve with. I am very much aware that I'm going to be the next one if nothing dramatically will change in the upcoming future. And I also don't have kids. Many people that I serve with, they do not have kids. Many fallen heroes of Ukraine do not have kids. And with every death of a Ukrainian soldier or civilian, dies another generation of people. And this is just genocide. We're getting extinct. I myself come from Donetsk region, which is now my hometown is now under occupation, and you can just speak Ukrainian and be killed. You can leave your home in the morning and somebody will see you with a Ukrainian flag bracelet or whatever, and you will not return back home in the evening. My hometown went through outbursts of cholera, a disease that we in the civilized world have battled many centuries ago. And my hometown is basically going through 12th century again, because the rotten bodies of civilians, soldiers are poisoning the ground and the water, thus causing the outburst of cholera. And, all of these things, they keep me up at night. And when I see the fatigue, the frustration that is in the news, it really does not make me want to live more, to be honest. Sometimes I just wish that I was one of those people who got killed in the beginning of full-scale invasion, so that I would not see what is going on right now, and how difficult it is to fight right now. But I also understand that I have no right to back down, because my comrades are not backing down. So what moral right do I have to, slow down my work? So this is basically it. We are Ukrainians, we are tired as well. Don't get us wrong. It's been almost 2 years. Some people in Ukraine have been fighting with no vacations, with no day offs. But we do not want to live under occupation. We do not want our families to live under occupation, because life under occupation does not exist. We're just getting slaughtered. we do not want that. We want to be back at our civilian jobs. I want to practice law maybe someday again. I have brilliant comrades who are very talented IT specialists, doctors, civil servants, whoever. We all want to live our peaceful lives and help Europe prosper in whatever professional capacity that we work. But unfortunately, right now, this is impossible. So my message is, please don't leave us. We do not want to be alone in this, and we value your support very much.
Vielen Dank dir. Mir fällt es schwer, da eigentlich was dazu zu sagen, weil man spürt deine Entschlossenheit, man spürt aber auch.
Well, I'm finding it hard to say something to that because we can obviously hear your determination, but also the desperation, because of course it may be you may be next, and there's not much one can say to that. Just expressing my solidarity and all the best, and also something like a hug, because we are here today just to do a little bit to improve the chances, and that your dreams from normal life in Ukraine can maybe become true, and I think that's what we all want. Okay, let's continue. Tadeusz Iwański, he heads the department for Belarus and the center in Warsaw, and so he writes very interesting essays on the homepage of the Center for Eastern European Studies in Warsaw. I'm going to post the link in the chat. He's also studied, among other things, Ukrainian philology, and he worked at the Ukrainian desk of the Polish radio station. So he really knows this field, and we're looking forward to his input talk. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak tonight to all the people on Zoom. Well, I will first I will share with you some reflections on how I see the situation in Ukraine after almost 2 years. So I think that a lot has changed within Ukraine politics and Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian situation, social situation throughout the war. However, some things remain the same. I think there is still a large majority of the people being sure that Ukraine must defeat Russia and should not step into any negotiations concerning sovereignty and territorial integrity. This majority do not trust any temporary ceasefire that it could lead to any kind of sustainable peace. This is what Tata rightly mentioned. And this majority, like in the big words, let's say, it constitutes a conscious political nation that has finally been forged out during the war with a very clear view who they are and what they want, that they are not Russians, they are Europeans, they deserve place in NATO, in the EU, in Europe. However, I think that some general moods are changing. The people feel exhausted, the people feel much poorer, and so do the soldiers on the front lines and people supporting them at the back. They feel the situation in the country is, after 2 years, is not going in good direction. And this is contrary to the moods from the first months of the war. There is a growing feeling that the war is for long, that Russia is strong, that it has reserves, it has potential, and it has stamina. So what we can also see is kind of a shrinking political and societal consolidation around the country's leadership. This kind of a rally round the flag effect. I think it is no longer there, at least to the extent that we've been observing in the first months of the war. This is to the certain extent, well, regular or inevitable, but you cannot simply live in such a intensification for that long period of time. But with the pathologies that are in Ukraine, despite the wartime, and they are coming into light, the evidence of corruption, abuse of power, oppression of journalists, the self-censorship of journalists and civil society has also been shrinking. And so has been kind of a self-restraint from the opposition politicians fighting for their political survival under the martial law conditions. These breed tensions among the politicians and within the ruling elite. After almost 2 years of war, we came back to the internal politics as usual, as before the war. We observe open critique towards President Zelensky from politicians such as the Kyiv mayor, Mr. Klitschko, or the ex-president Petro Poroshenko on the one hand. And also we see like pure political thinking and doing from President Zelensky on the other. The good example is the dismissal of Commander-in-Chief General Zaluzhny. But in my opinion, it was purely politically motivated and driven by the steadily deteriorating relations with the president. Challenges. What are the challenges? I think the main goal of the Ukrainians is what I agree with Tata, is to basically kick the Russians out of the country. And in order to achieve this goal, well, several things needs to be done. Like Ukraine should be provided with enough weapons, ammunition, military equipment to be strong enough to fight the Russians, and technologies also. Ukraine needs more external financial assistance to secure social or civil spendings. Well, this is crucial to maintain social stability and for Ukraine to be able to allocate the money from the taxes that it is collecting to allocate them to the military needs. And third point, I think Ukraine must conduct effective draft campaign under new law on mobilization because Ukraine lacks not only weapons and ammunition, but also lacks manpower. And why Ukraine's victory is so important to us, to the West, to Poland or Baltic states in particular? Well, my take is that Russia will not stop. In the Kremlin's perception, this war takes place in Ukraine, but it's not only about Ukraine and it's not only with Ukraine. Russia's goal is not only to conquer Ukraine, but to change or reverse the security architecture in Europe. And this is not kind of a secret. Like these goals were clearly announced by Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs back in December 2021, like 3 months before the invasion. To put it shortly, the 3 most important stated goals were to make Eastern Europe a Russian zone of influence, Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, of course, and Moldova, to make Central Europe, so Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Baltic states, a security buffer zone, and to withdraw the US troops from the new NATO member states. This is basically what Russia still wants from the collective West, especially from the US. And this is why Russia, well, as Putin perceives it, is at war with the West. Because the West, they think, wants to undermine Russia's basic security interests by enlarging NATO, enlarging the EU on the territories that were once controlled by, well, Tsarist, then Soviet Russia. The Kremlin simply wants to reverse this process because it feels kind of threatened, allegedly. So the Kremlin thinks that it fights not with the real Ukrainians in Ukraine, but because according to Kremlin propaganda, the Ukrainians are alike Russians, but with the puppet regime that is supported by the West and led by the West, especially the US. So if Ukraine falls due to also our lack of solid further commitment in form of money or military assistance, Russia can think that the West is weak, divided, and not ready for confrontation, and that Russia can go further. I think Putin already thinks like that, observing our hesitations in regard to providing Ukraine with assistance, talking about possible peace deals, blocking packages for Ukraine, like we saw it in December last year in the EU with the Ukraine facility instrument, or that when they look what is going on in the US Congress. Therefore, if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, I think he will go further on, to the Baltic states, to Poland, using different instruments, of course, cyber, hybrid, the worst case scenario, kinetic, like military, to achieve his goal, to intimidate us, to make us agree on for concessions. So this is why we in Poland, neighboring Kaliningrad Oblast, neighboring Belarus, or our partners in Baltic states, that's why we are so afraid that Ukraine can lose. And that's why we have been helping so much Ukraine. And that's why we've been mobilizing our allies in Germany, in France, in the US to increase military spendings and assistance to Ukraine. Because, basically we see it as the best way to deter Russia. Thank you.
Vielen Dank dir.
Thank you very much. I have put I've looked at the link, the chat. Tata, if you're still there, everybody wishes you well. There's a lot of messages of solidarity and friendship and wishes of good luck and success. So many people really address you, Tata. Do have a look at the questions, have them voted up if you like, so that we can select them afterwards for the debate. I would now like to pass the floor to Sabine Fischer. Sabine Fischer is a senior fellow of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. It is a foundation for science and politics. She was present in our very first webinar when the Russian troops had not entered Kiev yet. And I'm quite happy to see you again, but at the same time, I feel guilty of being happy about it because it's not a happy reason why we re-meet again. I think that you have offered a very interesting article about the destruction of Ukraine and the threat to worldwide democracy and peace. And I'm sure that you will be giving us an insight into your latest publication. Please, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I I agree that it's with very mixed feelings that I looked forward to meeting you again here, because almost 2 years ago, when we were all deeply shocked that the war had started, we had no idea how long it would take. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very impressed with the numbers of people logging on and really sharing the interest in the topic. I was a little bit afraid in the autumn of last year that the war on Ukraine and the suffering of the people in Ukraine was finally being forgotten. Albeit slowly, but surely, and that doesn't seem to be the case right now. I would this time like to concentrate a little more on Russia and have a look at the war from a Russian perspective, and perhaps talk about the strategies and the objectives of the Putin regime, which is a chauvinist regime, in my view. Chauvinism is explained in my latest book. It is a combination of sexism, imperialism, aggression or aggressivity, and autocracy. All these elements really gave rise to the war. I would like to concentrate on the objectives and the reasons for this war, because he started in 2014 and then waged the Great War in 2022. Tadeusz is absolutely right. Have a look at the draft of the Russian Foreign Ministry of December 2021. Tadeusz mentioned it already. It was an ultimatum that was put before NATO and the United States by Putin, and he wanted to reshuffle Europe in a zone with a much weakened American influence and a strong zone under the control of Russia with a so-called more neutral zone. But he wanted to cover at the time the Warsaw Pact states. Poland, namely, and Moldova. And he wanted the total or almost total withdrawal of the US troops from Europe. It was an ultimatum that was submitted to the West after the very chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And in the autumn of 2021, they finally came to the conclusion that the West is very much weakened, and they took this particular initiative. In every further step that came afterwards, all the further developments and everything that was talked about in the negotiations, it became clear how closely the Ukraine and the aggression against Ukraine was linked to this strategy. So Ukraine is a centerpiece of the implementation of this strategic vision, and it is an almost a crazy vision of Europe, and Moscow also wanted to find a solution for the so-called Ukraine question. Very intensive negotiations followed in January, in the first half of 2021, and they came to a halt because Vladimir Putin wouldn't want to discuss about the troops, about the positioning. He never relinquished his maximum requests and objectives. We don't know when he took the decision to enter into a war. The decision was probably taken much earlier, probably sometime in 2021, and at the very latest in the autumn of 2021, and it all happened between the 21st and 24th February. The first thing was the recognition of the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, and then the invasion came. There were some catastrophic misgivings and perceptions that were the foundation for the invasion. In the week before the invasion, I was in Moscow and I talked to so many people. They were floating wrong assumptions that in a matter of a few days you could be in Kiev, you could take over Kiev, and it wouldn't take long. And I would also like to mention the Tucker Carlson interview of last week. It's exactly the same thing that he said about Poland. If we are attacked, we shall defend ourselves. And in such a case, we will be in Kiev in 4 days, and Ukraine will be split, and we will take control of Ukraine, and there will probably be just a small leftover state of Ukraine with Lviv as the capital. This, however, never materialized. And that takes me to my second point, the war developments. I think we can observe two phases from March 22 to the summer of 23. That would be the first phase, where there were many military defeats and uncertainties on the Russian side, because what happened is the following: Russia invaded Ukraine with a society that defended itself very strongly and wholeheartedly. That was something unexpected. And then Russia was confronted with their own military forces, inability to actually transpose the fantasies that they had cherished. And they were unprepared for the reaction in the Western world. The Western political circles moved away from their positions before March 2021, where they always wanted some kind of find some understanding with Russia, come to terms with Russia. They turned against Russia. And then we had some important moments during the war, which from the Russian perspective were rather unexpected. In April, the withdrawal from the Northern Front, then the withdrawal from Kiev, then the first rather successful counteroffensive of Ukraine, and regaining of certain territories by Ukraine. Then the difficulties to keep the war perspective going, and then things became much more critical. There was a stronghold within the Ukrainian society, and there was almost a war of attrition that started around Bakhmut, for example. And it was difficult to move forward. And there were also the conflicts with the Wagner troops, and their uprising in the mid of 2023. So the war did not really proceed in a very successful manner. In the summer of 2023, something new kicked in, something like a consolidation with respect to the political narrative and also with the military forces re-establishing themselves. Prigozhin was murdered. That was decisive. Russia succeeded in dampening the worst economic effects of the war internally. And in the second half of 2023, the Russian military was able to counter the second counter-offensive of Ukraine so that they could not recuperate significant territories. So there are no significant successes for the Russian military, but the war itself has stabilized, and that's very important for Putin because presidential elections, so-called presidential elections, are coming up. They have nothing to do with democratic elections. But it is most important to stabilize the regime. So, by ways of conclusions, I would like to say that the stability of the regime is very, very closely linked to the developments of the war. And what happened towards the end of 2022, after the uncertainty and the instability, the Russian regime learned its lessons and prepared the society for a long-lasting war. And that's another link to the durability of the regime and the length of the war. Let me very briefly look at the international dimension of this war. It is very important. One aspect was already mentioned by Tadeusz. It's a fact that Russia, from its own perspective, will never speak of a war of aggression, but a war to defend itself against a so-called or supposed Western aggression against the Russian world. That is the dominant narrative since the beginning of the war in 2014, and this narrative has become more extreme over the years, and especially since the Great War was started in 2022. And that again means that from Putin's perspective, the war can only be ended considering, in full consideration and acceptance of this narrative. And there's been a rather major change going on, because until the beginning of the Great War, in the Russian side still tried, for example, to make some poisonous offerings in negotiations. These crazy treaty drafts in 2021 to come to terms and to an agreement with the superpower United States. And since the onset of the invasion, they crossed a line. And since then, the only thing which is important is to destabilize and to erode the Western alliance and the Ukraine. That is the main objective which is being pursued at this moment. We do have difficulties in the democracies in the Western world at the same time. The US elections are coming up, and I see that I have taken up too much time already, but the Tucker Carlson interview is really highly interesting to see how Russia is pursuing the erosion of the United States. And if Donald Trump returns to the White House, then two objectives are met. The first one is that the Ukraine support will probably deteriorate, and Russia hopes to be in a position to win the war. And the second objective is to undermine the Western alliance with reference to Article 5 of the NATO agreement. I'll shorten my contribution, and I would like to say, by ways of conclusion, that a very critical year has just started. What I've been describing is not only what the Russian leadership imagines, it is also what they live for and what they practice. And we also have a very uncertain development in the world going on with the US elections coming up. I see three scenarios. One of it is the continuation of the war of attrition, as we already witness it now, which means that the support from the West will help the Ukraine to survive, but not to win it. And the second scenario would be Ukraine really starts to win the war, and then the Putin regime would come under such pressure that the appraisal of the situation would change, and negotiations could be taken up, and Ukraine would be able to go into these negotiations very strongly. And the third scenario would be that the Western support crumbles for Ukraine, and that the military power of Ukraine would then really be defeated, and that would have far-reaching results and repercussions for Europe and for the whole world. And that's a scenario which we can no longer exclude. Absolutely not. We can also not exclude the first scenario, the war on attrition, because what can happen is that the war of attrition simply moves into the scenario number 3, and a defeat of Ukraine, and the effects would be horrendous for us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was really clear, and there were many topics that we also had questions about. So continue to ask your questions and vote on other questions. We're going to look at that in a moment. But I would like to give the floor to Robin Wagener now. He is a member of the Federal Parliament in Germany. He's president of the German-Ukrainian Parliamentary Group. And like Sabine Fischer and Tadeusz Iwański, he also was in Ukraine last week, I think, and he's going to tell us about that visit and also what he thinks about German support for Ukraine and European support for Ukraine. Robin, it's good to have you. 4 or 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks maybe, you were here to speak about Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, etc., because he's also coordinator for this area, and now you're here for the topic of Ukraine. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to really talk about what's going on in Ukraine, especially now. And I'm happy that we have that scientific view here, but also somebody from Ukraine, from the front line with Tata, because that's a bit of the issue, with many of the debates that I see, that we talk about Ukraine, but not really with Ukrainians. And so that's why I thought it was important also during the war to keep talking to people from Ukraine, so really have an impression directly from the ground. And well, the picture that Tata and the atmosphere that she painted, that was very, very impressive. The desperation and the fatigue, and of course that it is a very fatal situation, but then at the same time, that determination to keep defending yourself and your life in freedom and in a democracy. And that's something that I've kept hearing in Ukraine, in areas that were under occupation for a time, but also in a therapeutic rehabilitation center for people who had been injured or who had been tortured, raped in occupied areas, that they really, of course, are very tired after 2 years of this, but are still really determined to keep going, and a very clear understanding what would happen if Ukraine was to stop. And that's why I get so angry when I read comments like, stop delivering weapons to Ukraine. I mean, it's so clear what would happen. People would be displaced, tortured, and raped in that case. And people in Ukraine have decided in 2014 already to have a rule of law and democracy. And I can really understand that they don't want to go back on that. And so I'm really happy to still feel the solidarity in civil society in Germany from the beginning. That was there, strong solidarity and support for people from Ukraine. And I think it's important to not just think about military support, but also, for instance, about refugees. A lot has been done in the municipalities by many people, and then also rebuilding civil and critical infrastructure in Ukraine, because a lot of the times Russia tries to make regions uninhabitable, to destroy the energy infrastructure, etc. So I think it's really great that lots of utilities, for instance, have helped by means of municipal partnerships with water supply, with infrastructure support, etc. That is very important too, because German support is not just from the federal government, but it's also what comes from people to people, for people. And that's another important element to keep showing and remembering our solidarity with Ukraine. When you have this direct cooperation, cities with cities and companies for companies, and I'm in a constant exchange with companies and citizens, etc., wondering how can we support Ukraine. And then German support, of course, it's a lot about weapons, not about diplomacy, but we have had strong resolutions in the UN to support Ukraine and condemnation of the Russian invasion. That's not something that just happens. Oh, we're going to write a resolution, a motion for a resolution, and then everyone's going to say yes in New York. That's not how it goes. So many diplomats had to work for that, not just politicians in the limelight, but lots of diplomats in the background massively working to keep up that kind of support. In times, you have to see that Russia with China, Iran really are working on their own networks of autocracies. So away from rule of law and a global order where in which every state has certain rights. I'm looking for the right word here. The speaker says so, with respect for human rights, etc. And their network is just based on the right of the stronger states. So we have a lot of different forms of cooperation, and at the same time, we shouldn't forget what's been done. And I am among those in the Bundestag who keep pointing out that we have to do more. I do that in the plenary, during demonstrations, in all types of debates and discussions. So we have to point out that we have to do more. But a lot has been done as well. And sometimes that's not really perceived. And in Ukraine, when I was there, they do know that the German Parliament, for instance, has decided to go up to 7 billion from 4 euros for Ukraine. And that, I mean, when we have difficulties with the budget, etc. So that is not just the solidarity in the symbolic way, but it's really concrete, for concrete weapons that are going to help. So basic equipment, winter equipment, etc., air support, those are debates that have long in the past, maybe now, but we've talked a lot about the Gepard tanks, Patriot systems, artillery systems, and the tanks 2000. I mean, there are many discussions about that also in the area of infantry, with the specific types of tanks, battle tanks for ground war, etc. A lot has happened, and so sometimes weapons can save lives and help Ukraine be able to defend itself, and they help saving lives because they make it easier to survive such a battle, because modern tanks make it possible to maybe survive even if the tank is destroyed, and that's not the case for older Soviet-type models. So that's also something that we're fighting for. And modern weapons, a colleague of mine said that a while ago, we can't just have a smaller post-Soviet army against a bigger post-Soviet army. We need modern practices, so we're working on that to really train the Ukrainian army to employ more modern techniques, etc., as we have under NATO, and at the same time help with modern technology. But, of course, the question is always, is that enough? So we have all these things that we've done, but the answer to this question is no, it does not. It's not enough, clearly not enough. And we also have to be honest when we're looking back at all these things that have been done. Often, when we're looking at the offensive last year that wasn't as successful as many had hoped, many had maybe hoped for too much, but if we're looking for why this didn't work as expected, maybe it was also because Western support took a long time to arrive. All the deliveries, the decisions, it all took a long time, and that meant that the Russians were able to really get their positions, and that costs lives in occupied areas and in those amongst the soldiers that are supposed to liberate those occupied areas. So that hesitation is a major problem in our discussions, and I would have hoped that we could also have seen clearer signals. So Vilnius, the Euro-Atlantic integration and the NATO's perspective for Ukraine was underlined, yes, but I would have hoped for a clearer invitation and a clearer sign. I really am convinced that Ukraine should join NATO. And that's not just the only security guarantee that we can give to Ukraine. I mean, that's not the only thing. Of course, we need many other steps, and that's important too. But this is definitely one of the goals for Ukraine to join NATO, and that will also strengthen our protection against this aggressor. And so we also always have these discussions about individual weapon systems. So at the moment it's about Taurus system. So Taurus is necessary for Ukraine, or Taurus or something similar, but this long-range weapons of this type that you can use in a targeted way. That's just necessary to really be able to target ammunition depots on the other side. So I really think that it should be delivered, and in combination with F-16 from our partners, which is also still outstanding, because that would enable an integration in the system. And after everything I've seen on the topic, I think that despite all objections, we could still do it. It's possible to train Ukrainians to do all that, so I think we should do it. But we should also stop discussing individual weapon systems, which is taking too long. We have to look at what's the goal. So we have these individual detailed discussions, and we're forgetting that, for instance, Ukraine needs more ammunition urgently, so that we have to scale up armament production, not just in Europe, also in the US. And so that's sometimes something that's forgotten, because we focus too much on the details and we're forgetting the bigger picture. Because we have to keep thinking about the goal, after all. So if the objective is that the Ukraine should win this war, then yes, we will need individual weapon system, but we have to look at all the things that are required for that. So then what will happen in the US if Trump wins, and Europe should prepare for that? I really don't like this question, I have to say. I think that we're already in a situation where we have to contribute more. We shouldn't wait for Donald Trump or somebody else to win the elections. We're already in the situation where we have a constant blockade in the Congress, in the US Congress. Now we've had the decision in the Senate. The other vote is still open, but I also hear American colleagues who are very willing, normally very friendly. They say Europeans have to do more. We want to continue to support Ukraine, but we need more from Europe too, because we have other areas in the world that we're focusing on. So I think that we have to do more, and it's important that the Chancellor also asks more of our allies here, and we ourselves have to do more. And it's important to stop focusing on this as long as it takes. Yes, that's important, but more important is to do as much as it takes now. So as strong as it takes, as fast as it's necessary, that's what we should be focusing on now. And I'm coming to an end. What's missing? So I said in the beginning that there's a lot of solidarity for Ukraine, democracy under attack, and yes, that's true. But we also need a clearer awareness that we are talking about our own strategic security, our own security interests. Sabine was very clear on that. Aggressive Russian imperialism and what it would mean if Russia were to win, and what it means if Putin, in an interview, talks about Poland the way that he did, and the Russian propaganda, etc., on Baltic countries, the things that are being said there, what that will mean. And if we're looking at disinformation campaigns against all Western democracy, there was a study by the Foreign Department in Germany with clear disinformation campaigns really to try to destabilize Germany, done by Russia. So this is already the reality. This is already happening. So we have to really be aware that it's necessary to put a stop to this type of Russian imperialism. And at the same time, we have to strengthen our own society's resilience, because we can only support Ukraine to the extent necessary if we are strong in our own democracy. That means we need to do more for cyber defense, and we have to understand this destabilization is already happening, and we have to strengthen our own democracy, strengthen media competencies, all of these things. You don't think about that first when you're thinking about your defense capacity, but it's necessary in order to be stable on your feet. And I think it's important that we always, all of us, advocate for our system of a parliamentary democracy with human rights and freedoms in order to defend against the very targeted propaganda against that, because we can only support other democracies if we are strong on our own.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. We have many questions, and I would invite you to go have a look at the questions. But since Robin mentioned it, and some others of you also, I would like to start with one thing. Many people ask themselves, is there no possibility for negotiations at all? Can we not sit down with Putin? In the interview with Tucker Carlson, and it's a pity that we name him all the time. We had the Istanbul negotiations, and it was the West that basically stopped the negotiations. What was the role of those negotiations in the Istanbul format? Yes. What Putin said in this propaganda dialogue with Tucker Carlson was something that he had said in the past. It is part and parcel of the Russian propaganda narrative, which started in March, April of last year, and which is repeated all the time, that the Anglo-Saxon front, the US, and had prohibited him from talking to each other. And that is a blatant lie. It's simply not true. There are no facts to corroborate this. The negotiations started around about the 28th of February, and at the end of March, the Ukraine delegation, which had come under huge pressure because they didn't feel the support from the West, they submitted the so-called Istanbul communique or memorandum. And you never really know what Putin refers to. Does he really refer to that Istanbul communique? It contained very far-reaching concessions from Ukraine, and Putin simply refused all of them. And when Boris Johnson visited him on the 8th of April, apparently the prohibition was declared, but that's not true. That's another lie. The fact is that the negotiations were not concluded successfully because Putin did not move 1 inch from his final objectives in the war. That they also fell through because the Ukraine discovered far-reaching war crimes when they recuperated Kiev. And the third reason why they didn't really come to a positive result, these negotiations, is that the support from the West kicked in. So the reality is quite different from what is being depicted in this propaganda talk. Russia simply didn't want to accept a solution which would have had rather negative consequences for Ukraine. And the negotiations then were really stopped because 4 additional regions were annexed by Russia. And since then, for the past 1.5 years, the position always is we are willing to negotiate, and then the continuation of the sentence is overlooked because Russia then goes on to say only if Ukraine accepts the new reality of Ukraine, and that means that 20% of the Ukrainian territory will become Russian territory. So it's a no-go. You can't really enter into those negotiations unless Ukraine totally gives up. And Tucker Carlson gave him ample opportunities to repeat again and again the same narrative to simply make sure that really everyone understood what the narrative is, but it is a lie, and no facts really support these assumptions. Thank you very much. You also wrote an article about that, and I think we could post the link to that article. And I think it's very important to also make sure that people find the sources and can read up. Sabine said everything that I would have wanted to say about the negotiations. And if I look at the mindset of stabilization with us, then an interview between Tucker Carlson and Putin would mean that some critical questions are put to the politician on the other side, but that's not what happened. Vladimir Putin had an opportunity to simply tell the world what he always wants to tell the world, and he had ample opportunity to send this message to all the Western living rooms. And Tucker Carlson was not giving a very good example of free journalism, but of very clearly opinionated journalism. So I don't think that this is something that we should believe in and that we should fall for, because it's just one lie after the other. And we have heard so much about the invasion, and we also know what happened afterwards. So I really cannot understand how people can fall into the trap of such a so-called interview. I also chair the delegation of a committee, the East-West Committee at the level of the OSCE. And Russia, for a very, very long time, has been blocking the budgets in the OSCE. And now they have taken up a call from the Russian Duma that they should withdraw from this committee altogether, because the debate in the committee is very critical. Russia has never been paying any contributions within the system for many, many years. They pretend to be a serious partner in the endeavor, but they are not. They don't even pay up for it. So it's very important to really show the reality and show the fact. And Tucker Carlson really mounted a show for Putin. And of course, I am convinced that this is an illegal war and aiming at the distinction of a people. And I think we should say so. Thanks very much. Tadeusz.
Yes, thank you. I will add one more lie to Putin's lies, which is the context that this negotiations have been taking place in Istanbul. We have to remember that Putin once said that that the Russians withdrew the troops from the north of Ukraine as a gesture of goodwill to make these negotiations happen and to have a deal done. But the fact is that they were defeated there. They were. It was this Russian operation in northern Ukraine. It ended up with fiasco. So simply they could not take Kyiv, and so they had to roll back. And one more, I think, important thing is that the context is that Sabine said about Bucha, and what is important, I think, is to say that Zelensky at that time and Ukrainian authorities, they were simply it was no go to get into negotiations with the Russians after this mass graves were revealed, because people wouldn't understand that, people wouldn't support that. And with on the negotiations, in the future, we have to remember that what does it mean for the Russians to negotiate and how they see the deal. Sabine said about this 20% of land, and that's a fact, but also like what the Russians are reiterating, especially intensively in last, let's say, months, when after the fiasco of Ukrainian counteroffensive, when they feel strong, is that they stress on this demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Well, this is like coming back to the official Russian narratives. And what does it mean? Well, demilitarization, this is pretty clear, but denazification, basically it means that any pro-Western politicians are banned in Ukraine. They have to be expelled, and that Ukraine is governed by the pro-Russian forces, basically by Russian puppets. So if we think about striking a deal with Russia, we have to first ask ourselves if Russia wants a deal and what kind of deal Russia wants, because this deal is not sustainable and cannot be accepted by the Ukrainians. Thank you.
Kann ich noch einen kurzen Punkt anfügen?
Ja, klar.
Can I add just one more thought? That's something that slipped my mind, and I think it's very important. We simply have to remember all the time what happened in the first 3 months of the war. Ukraine submitted the draft Istanbul communique in Istanbul, and then they wanted to continue the talks until the 17th of May. And exactly in that phase, Russian forces completely destroyed Mariupol. And then they even attacked the steel plant of Azov. And Zelensky in April and May said several times, if the civil population cannot be safe, if the people die due to the attacks on the Azov steel mill, then we will leave the negotiations. Everything happened in parallel. The fight about Mariupol and the destruction. Thanks very much. We have many questions regarding the negotiations. So the arguments that are being brought up are we need to support Ukraine until we get to a situation in which Ukraine can enter really strongly with a strong position into the negotiations. Is that the situation, or when do you see a possibility for them to enter into those negotiations? Sabine?
I did it in the beginning. My point of view,
darüber, was eigentlich aus unserer Perspektive das Ziel der Unterstützung und damit eben auch das Kriegsziel sein sollte.
Our support.
Aus meiner Sicht darf das eben wirklich nicht sein, so lange wie nötig, sondern so viel wie nötig dafür, dass die Ukraine sich in diesem Krieg militärisch durchsetzt. Ja? Und ich halte mich ganz bewusst zurück. Ich finde, was Tata formuliert hat in ihrem Beitrag über das ukrainische Kriegsziel, also die Befreiung des ukrainischen Staatsgebietes vollständig, das ist ein vollkommen legitimes Ziel, denn das besetzte ukrainische Staatsgebiet ist völkerrechtswidrig besetzt und in diesen besetzten Gebieten finden grauenhafte Dinge statt. Also insofern, das finde ich legitim. Ob das militärisch vollkommen realistisch ist eine andere Frage. Aber das Ziel müsste sein, aus meiner Perspektive, die Ukraine so entschlossen zu unterstützen, dass sie in der Lage ist, nach und nach zurückzuerobern und dadurch ihre eigene Position zu stärken, bis zu einem Punkt, wo sie wirklich aus einer starken wo auf der russischen Seite die Erkenntnis reift, dass dieser Krieg zu kostenreich ist und mit militärischen Mitteln nicht zu gewinnen ist und die Ukraine aus einer starken Position in Verhandlungen gehen kann. An welchem Punkt das ist, am Ende kann ich jetzt weder vorhersagen noch entscheiden, aber das sollte das Ziel sein. Ja, und dazu gehört dann eben, Robin hat ausgeführt, oder ist eingegangen auf die Diskussion über unterschiedliche Waffensysteme. Dazu gehören eben wirklich Waffensysteme, die die Ukraine befähigen, tief in das besetzte Gebiet einzudringen und diese russischen Verteidigungsmechanismen zu unterbinden. Das ist absolut elementar, wenn man auf dieses Ziel zusteuern will.
Basic an die Dolmetscherin. Daniela, ich glaube, du hast ein Problem mit dem Mikrofon. Tadeusz kann ich schlecht hören. Ich habe es auch nicht richtig gehört auf dem englischen Kanal. Bitte einmal zur Babette wechseln und sein Mikro kontrollieren. Da war ein Problem. Tadeusz,
Okay.
you should now hear the interpretation.
Hi. Hopefully you can hear the English interpretation again.
To maybe switch. Maybe there's a problem. Okay. Vielen Dank.
Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry about that. So many ask about the negotiations, and it sounds as if nobody has even approached Putin about it. Immediately prior to the full invasion, many international attempts were made to stop him from the invasion. Our foreign minister and the chancellor went to Russia, talked to him, but it's a fact that for the time being, there is no willingness to talk about anything but a total capitulation of Ukraine. And that is something that you need to realize if you talk about negotiations, because negotiations can only be held if you have two sides willing to enter into those negotiations. There's no Russian willingness for it. And President Zelensky is also not inclined to enter into negotiations, but I think we can learn from history in this respect. We had a situation where a frozen conflict was started from a situation of strength and a situation of weakness in Ukraine. Those were the Minsk negotiations. It was a frozen conflict of 14,000 victims on Ukrainian side because of the military activities of the Russians. And it simply shows that you cannot have any negotiations where the aggressor can push through his objectives in a situation of military strength. So therefore, the preconditions for entering into negotiations are not available, are not fulfilled. What we do is that we support Ukraine as a sovereign state with the possibility to take its own decisions. We will never tell someone like Tata whether she should continue her combat or not. She is the one who needs to determine the preconditions for negotiations for stopping the war. It's not up to us to tell them. That's exactly what Sabine also said. Putin finds itself in the situation of an international conflict, but he will simply not respect the sovereignty of the other state. And that's a major stumbling stone in this respect.
My turn, right?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't heard what Sabine said, but I do agree with Robin that the negotiations should not be held just for the sake of negotiations. Like, I also don't see that I see that neither side is ready for negotiations. Like, I think Putin is now at the position that he's winning, that they can really win this war, especially after the fiasco of negotiate of the counteroffensive last year, and with all these talks in the West, hesitations, lack of commitment, situation in the US, Ukraine taken hostage in the US election campaign, and so on. So I think this is pure lie. What Putin is saying, that he's ready, because he's ready for Ukraine to capitulate, not for the sincere negotiations. And for Zelensky, like, this is kind of a political suicide for him to step into the negotiation, because well, you're going to have kind of a Maidan in Ukraine. So I think it is the idea to the only way to have real negotiations. This is to push the Russians so hard that they can see that the only way for Putin to save face somehow, I think it cannot be. It is not easy to find the compromise that he can save the face and Ukraine can feel it is winning. But still, to push the Russians that hard that Putin is ready to step into sincere negotiations, is ready to strike a real compromise, if we think about compromises, because, well, Putin is someone to blame, of course, but we have to, well, remember about one thing, that this war for Putin, this is kind of a regime survival situation, and this is making things, well, more complicated. Thank you.
Danke. Jetzt genau zu dem Druck kommt auch die top-gevotete.
On pressure, that's our top-voted question now by Konrad. I'm going to read it out. There's lots of similar questions, so this is the top-voted question. Topic sanctions. Konrad asks, are there other ways of sanctions against Russia that we haven't used yet, and how can existing sanctions be better implemented? We have talked a lot about that at the beginning of the war. I have the impression that we're now hearing less about that. And then there were 350 billion frozen assets, and the Ukraine only gets the interest payments from that. So basically, that's the question. So what could be done with that? We would like to hear your opinion on that. Sabine, maybe to start, and then we're going to around. You don't all have to answer every question, but well, I started twice. That's why I thought I'd leave my colleagues to talk first, but okay. So there are other options for sanctions, of course, and there are sanctions that the EU has not adopted because the impact on our economies would have been too heavy. And most important example would be a complete gas embargo, but Russia did that for us then. But that was not something that had been decided proactively on the EU side. And there are further such examples. But of course, these sanctions are broader and deeper than ever before, anything before. But at the same time, there are still issues with it. So the sanctions are important, I think. They are important on different levels. They are a very important political signal in different directions to Russia, but also to Ukraine as a sign of solidarity and to the international community. And of course, they have an impact on the Russian economy. So these are important results. But two things haven't been achieved. One, Russia has not been completely isolated economically. I mean, that was never really achievable because we have changes in the international system. We've had changes over the past 20 years. And so the West just does not have the possibility to really completely isolate a country like Russia. And so we can see that because they have a greater trade exchange now with China, India, other such countries, and they help Russia to mitigate the impact of the sanctions and the effects of the war. And two, of course, sanctions are being evaded. That's a huge problem. And so the Western states can't do a lot against the first issue, but of course, with regards to the second issue, they can act. There's a lot of things that could be done, and the first and most important priority, I believe, would be to really prevent evasion of sanctions for everything that feeds the Russian military industry, because that is a catastrophe that we've not managed to stop high technology and such elements, construction parts that are important for the Russian armament industries, because it's their re-exports, etc., the evading of sanctions, and it's still Russia still manages to get these goods, and that's unbelievable, really, and that's really something that should be stopped. And another word on this idea of confiscating Russian assets in the EU. So Ukraine has been advocating for this for a while, and a lot of people in the EU are focusing on this as well, and I think we should seriously consider it, because we're seeing that our resources are finite too, scarcer for supporting Ukraine. Maybe it's more the resource of political will, but still, if it could be made legally possible and politically decided to use these assets for Ukraine, that would be really lighten the burden. Robin, what does the German government think about that? I think it really should be considered, and we really should find a legally clean way to use these assets, and in coordination with our European partners, but to really, make it clean legally, because we are operating in within the rule of law, and if that's what we're defending, then we have to adhere to it ourselves. But I mean, of course, if somebody does such damage to another country, then of course we should be able to use their assets to just rebuild or finance the necessary defensive measures. And so on sanctions, one thing that I really find painful, the missing sanctions for nuclear material. And there are so many people who are saying, oh, such an important source of energy, and we should continue to use it in Europe. But that's exactly why we don't have these sanctions. And I think it would really be necessary to stop this source of income for the Russian regime. And sanction evasion, that is a very important point. And every time we're going abroad to relevant states, that's something that we talk about in order to see how we can stop this evasion of sanctions. But I also believe, and our partners are right, sometimes it's German companies, and what can be done in Germany to stop such evasive maneuvers. So maybe we need better equipment also for the criminal customs office, so that they have the statistical data on developments and exports, so that they know what could be double-use goods, and if they believe that if they have a suspicion about criminal sanctions evasion, and that they can act. So we have to act earlier in our own country, and of course follow up on all the information that we get from partners and from Ukraine. So they tell us this has hit us, and there was a Western part involved in that missile. So we have to make sure. I mean, sometimes we only hear about this in the media when it's already been done, but it's important to do it. Yesterday, there was this interview with Leonore Wessler and the situation in Austria. Austria still gets 98% of its gas from Russia. It's not just a little bit. It's all of the gas coming from Russia. So maybe a question to Tadeusz as well. We had this discussion about LNG terminals last year and dependency on gas. So I'm wondering, well, we have this rule of law and we had contracts, etc. the Austrian energy suppliers had these long-term contracts, but in Germany we managed to stop cancel these contracts with Gazprom somehow. So maybe you could say something on that, because I mean, a country like Austria, 98% of their gas coming from Russia, and they seem to be unable to stop it. Maybe Tadeusz on that, and then the others, because I just don't understand it. Tadeusz, please.
Well, I'm not an expert on Austria, but every time you can find some countries that are less willing to subscribe to the sanction regime and trying to find some possibilities, let's say. But in general terms on sanctions, well, I completely agree that we should enhance sanction regime, and in parallel we should work to close the gaps, to tighten the sanction regime, to close the loopholes, and to try to make harder for Russia to circumvent the sanction regime, because a lot of sanctions are already there, but Russia is managing to somehow circumvent it. When we look at export, let's say, of the countries, like any single, I think, European country, when you look at the statistics of export from Poland, Germany, France, Spain, to Kyrgyzstan, to Uzbekistan, to Azerbaijan, then you will see that this is not the genuine. Like this countries, they serve somehow as a intermediary, and this is how the sanctioned products from Europe are getting into Russia, and this also is about this dual use products. And one more thing, because many times I hear that why the sanctions don't work, and of course they don't work perfectly, but we should not expect that we can have immediate effect from sanctions, because when we look at the nature of sanctions, this is about we should not expect that Putin will stop the war after the sanctions are imposed. This is about making the cost of the war higher. This is about that. So this effect, if the sanctions are rightly imposed and they are tightened and they are, let's say, precise in a way, then we can have this effect will be in 2, 3, or 4 years, especially when it comes to technologies. Thank you.
Ja, danke schön. Und hängt natürlich auch einen großen Schritt, da haben wir auch Fragen zu, natürlich mit der Beziehung zu China.
And of course, the relationship with China, North Korea, etc., what Tata said in the beginning, that's also important. India, for instance, bought a lot of oil from Russia, so we've had a lot of questions on that. There is this tendency to see Russia together with South Africa, other African countries, etc., as an ally of anti-colonialist countries, etc. So I'd like to just briefly talk about that. But at the same time, I would like to read out the next question. Jan P. asks, what are your theories? Why do you think does Olaf Scholz refuse to deliver the Taurus air missile, and this hesitation? So Germany delivers a lot, but Poland, relatively speaking, delivers a lot more. We're looking at their GDP. And then also France, etc., doing a lot less than they could. So why this hesitation? What's the reason? Why do you believe that governments in Europe hesitate so much? Is it being afraid of nuclear escalation, etc. That's what many people are wondering. Sabine Fischer sort of raises her hand, maybe on the first or second point, because that is one of the most important questions here. Well, I was raising my hand on this topic of sanctions. Austria can't really say anything because I haven't looked at that topic lately, but I believe that a lot of things in the discussion aren't going completely right, and that's worrying, I think. And one is that we have a tendency to look at sanctions against Russia and other completely separate from other forms of support for Ukraine. And that's a problem because sanctions are then discussed as something that's not really helping at all. Russia's still waging war despite sanctions, so sanctions have failed. That's not correct, because of course the sanctions have an effect. These are more long-term effects, as Tadeusz said. If they were implemented more coherently, then they have more of an effect, of course, and they are the one instrument that we have with a longer-term effect. And other parts of our strategy, especially military support, is something for the immediate term, for now. And I've long been saying that we need both, but these debates are being led separately, and people get confused because of that. But I think that we have to talk about these things together as one, because we also have to focus on what has been achieved. A lot has been achieved. Ukraine has achieved a lot in this war, and that's why I tried to point out what has gone wrong for Russia, because we always focus on parts where Ukraine failed, but let's not forget where Russia failed, because it's just not very good for morale and self-confidence in Ukraine, and it's not good for our own psychologies to forget what has been achieved. So this is my plea to look at these elements of the Western strategy to support Ukraine together, because they belong together. That's how they make a strategy. So let's not discuss sanctions as something completely separate and then conclude that they failed because Putin was not forced to stop the war. I mean, that's really a very oversimplistic view. And then just a brief word on the hesitation that you mentioned. Why governments hesitate so much. And again, Robin talked about it as well, and I think it's important too. We have to look at the different nuances of what has been done. And if you look at German politics from the after 24th of February and before 24th of February, you can really see a sea change in the attitude of the German government there. So about this hesitation that we have, not just in Germany, also in other European countries and in the US. And I'm not talking about the Congress blockade and the election campaign, but just hesitation with a view to delivering arms that have long been there. So there are two factors here. One, yes, there is a fear of escalation, and I can acknowledge that because it's very, very difficult to make these decisions, these types of decisions. But on the other hand, I believe that this fear of escalation is often and in many situations exaggerated, and that we're really restricting our room for maneuver and Ukraine's room for maneuver, and I believe that's a mistake. And the second factor is that our politics, so Western help, is still dictated by our national political situations and not by what Ukraine needs in order to defend against Russia. And that's another issue, because that means that our reaction and what we decide depends very often on what's happening at the national level and isn't adequate for what Ukraine needs.
Tadeusz, would you like to come in and perhaps give us the perspective of Poland, because I think this fear of escalation is probably much more nuanced there.
Yeah, especially in terms of geography, I think. But I was listening to Sabine, and I completely agree that we have these two factors. And one thing that I could add is that, of course, this, well, the fear of escalation and the nuclear threat, yep, it is there. But well, Russia was already has already been, like, passing this threat, and it did not happen. I don't want to say that that I'm sure it will not happen, but we all should be aware that Russia very well reads our fears, and it is instrumentalizing them. It is exploiting them. So Russia is very good in all this, psychological operations and this psychological game. And also, I think we should try to reverse the question. Okay, we are not like providing Ukraine with this high-tech weapons because we fear the escalation. But what happens if we don't take that decision? That we should also think about that. What is happening in Ukraine about people being killed, and that we are not, with this inability to assist Ukraine with high-tech weapons, we are basically prolonging that war. We are making that war longer. And the second thing is that I think why we are so hesitating, or why you are so hesitating, is that I think, and this is partly the answer for your question, Maximilian, is that I think in Poland, as we are neighboring Russia, we are neighboring Belarus, and we have war at our doorstep in Ukraine, we feel that this war is really close, really close. And we feel the breath, let's say. And I think the more westwards we go, this fear is smaller. And I think the majority of the people in, well, you are better experts on Germany than I am, and I'm not an expert on Spain or Portugal, but I risk to say that they don't feel that war. They don't feel that war. So so this is also the question of the mindset, right? That on that, let's say, rational level, yes, the war is ongoing, people are dying, and there is a biggest threat for European security since the Second World War. But this is not something that people feel on the skin, and we in Poland, well, we can feel it, and that's why we were so, we gave a lot to Ukraine. We gave more than it is officially reported. Here I'm referring to one of the questions on chat. So we have all this, official, let's say, charts and graphs and so on. But the fact is that a lot of countries, they are providing Ukraine with, unofficially and so on. Thank you.
Danke. Robin, magst du noch dazu?
Ja, ich glaube,
Robin, would you also like to come in? Yeah, one of the central problems, I think, and I mentioned it already, is the hesitancy. Why do we support another state? Because of solidarity, or because of our mindset and in the interest of our own security. If it is the latter, then I think we will come to a turning point much quicker. And I think we should be clear about that in our political debate, much clearer than we have been in the past years when we talked about the support for Ukraine. Let me not be misunderstood. Solidarity is always a very good motor for support. But I think we need to consider wisely which decisions we take. Weapons can kill, and they do kill, and we must be fully aware of that. And I have already said that I would move forward and I would wish to deliver more weaponry, but it's not something that you can wipe off the table easily. You have to be able to live with the consequences of your decisions, and an escalation is always a possibility, of course. However, I do believe that we can learn from the past. The whole debate on tanks turned in that direction. Let's not deliver the tanks because it might escalate the war. Russian decisions will not depend on decisions that we take in Berlin. I'm pretty certain that Russia will always take its sovereign decisions, irrespective of Berlin, for example. And we've heard about Mariupol and other cities. All the escalations happened and kicked in without us delivering the weaponry. So I think we really need to take a huge next step and deliver. Russia will not be waiting for that. We have had phases where the nuclear threat was vocalized, and then Biden very clearly said that this would have severe consequences for Russia. And it was good that he never specified them, but it meant that this threatening scenario somehow was removed. So I think Tadeusz is completely right when he says that Putin knows exactly how to play with this psychological threat and pressure and tension. And I think we need to be clear about it and understand it clearly. There's another myth that comes up regularly. What will Russia do if it loses the war? And can you lose a war conventionally, and will it not escalate into a nuclear war? Just look to Vietnam and to Afghanistan, and you will find that it did not happen. The US withdrew from Afghanistan and Russia withdrew from Afghanistan without the war escalating into a nuclear war. So I think we all are aware of the consequences. So I think the strategic positioning is very important. There's another point. Russia self-depicting itself as the spearhead of an anti-colonial movement. After I went to Ukraine, I met last week in Warsaw some opposition members from Russia. and there were some people present from the Asian regions of Russia, and they told me how relentlessly they are being exploited at this very moment, being sent into the war. And it is fascinating to see the alliances that suddenly come up, and how Russia acts, or Moscow acts, in the very remote area of Russia. They are waging a war in order to defeat a sovereign state, which is a contradiction in terms if you want to be spearheading an anti-colonial movement. Now, in view of a war in Europe and in view of a difficult economic situation, we cannot withdraw from international cooperation, because wherever we withdraw, China is ready to step in, or Russia is ready to step in. And that is why international cooperation is so important. I am active in the area of Central Asia and the Caucasian republics, but it is very important to do that across the world. Thank you very much. Our time is up. You see that there are so many questions that we were unable to reply to. I'm sure that we'll have another webinar on the same topic because we just simply couldn't cope with the flood of questions. Robin has almost concluded the debate, but I would like to give Tadeusz and Sabine yet another minute to conclude or to let us know what they will take home. And perhaps you could also give people an idea about what an ordinary citizen can do now in order to help Ukraine. Tadeusz, what do you think?
I would just shortly refer to what Robin had just said. I think that Russia will, of course, it will be taking their own decision, but those decisions will be taken based on how they read the situation. And if they see that that we ramp up our production and we are getting ready for war, and if they see that we are ready to escalate somehow, then I think they can back down. Because I think they are aware that they cannot stand the regular war with NATO. So my point is that to not self-restrict ourselves and to have really good, well-tailored strategic communication. Of course, we are living in different, let's say, under different conditions in democratic states and so on, but still. I think I will just say that because Tata said at the beginning that the assistance should be as long as it takes. Robin said that as much as it takes. I would just add as quick as possible, because I think all these three, let's say, terms should be combined, and then, well, we can get closer to the success. And if we don't want Russia to test us, to test the Article 5, well, we need to stop Russia in Ukraine. And that's why this assistance is needed as long as it takes, as quick as possible. Thank you.
Ich würde sogar sagen, so schnell wie es nötig ist. Ja?
I would even say as fast as necessary. As quickly as Ukraine needs it, really. I can support you in every one of these remarks. And I would also like to go back to what Robin said. Max, I ignored your question on the global dimension, but I think in this whole context, it's immensely important to regard this war as a systemic war. It is an aggression, an assault not only against Ukraine, but also against the European Union, against NATO, against people in Russia, and with all the harshness and perfidy against democracies, internationally or individual states or democratic politicians. So it is an assault against the system, and we need to reply with a systemic response. Our defense of democracy is very, very important in this defense war. Because if our democracies no longer function well, and we have a very worrying example right before our eyes in the United States at the moment, then I think the chances for a total collapse are huge. So look at the war as a systemic war and react in a systemic way. And I would also like to appeal to the German population. Please observe the situation in Ukraine. Tadeusz and I, last week at 7:30, we met by coincidence in last week in Ukraine, and we came back from Ukraine with very impressive experiences there, and I think that we have so many imbalances in the reporting on Ukraine because this total exhaustion of the people themselves after 2 years of a full-blown war that's already started in reality 10 years ago is being interpreted as the unwillingness of continuing a war and a deception. And that is really a huge problem, that we take the liberty to interpret the situation so differently. It is really hugely impressive to see, to watch the performance of the Ukrainian people in this war. And I would really like to see much more support and understanding for their situation. Thank you very much. That's an excellent conclusion of the webinar. We will continue working on it, and I will try to re-invite Tata and other representatives of the civil society in Ukraine, people who do excellent work and are fully committed to supporting the general population. It is unbelievable what they achieve, and I think we need to acknowledge that. We went far beyond the time frame of our webinar, but I would like to thank you. I think it was fascinating, very interesting. Thank you also to the 1,400 crowdfunding sponsors of Europe Calling. Thank you to all. I shall contact Tata again because she had to leave the webinar earlier, and I will also receive some links from her, which give you an idea of how you can support Ukraine if you wish. And until the next time, I wish you well, and thank you so much for your interest. Goodbye.